Greetings, everybody, those who are here in person and those who are watching on Facebook. Glad to be with you. My name is Pastor Jake Bobby from Bloomfield, Nebraska.
Reverend Doctor.
Reverend Doctor. Yeah, nobody calls me that in Bloomfield. And I serve First Trinity Lutheran Church in Bloomfield, Bloomfield, Nebraska, which is just south of Yankton, about a half an hour southwest. So good to be with you today. So my presentation is got this sort of strange title: Re-engaging Engagement, Media, Ministry, and Community. This is a presentation that I've given a few different times, but this time I'm trying to fit it within a rural context and talk about it in a rural context. I think a lot of what Pastor Cook said can be applied to what I'm going to be talking about. The idea of taking time, and specifically when you're dealing with catechesis. Catechesis is a lifelong sort of a thing. It's not something to be done quickly. It's not something to be shoved into a 2-year period. And this is something that we put into practice in our congregation. We have catechesis going on especially for students throughout their entire time in high school. And we confirm actually at 12th grade instead of 8th grade. So I have them from the time they're 7th graders all the way to 12th grade, which means that I have a lot of time to do things that I couldn't do when it was just 2 years. In 2 years, I was trying to shove as much in as I could into those 2 years, because that's all the time I got. But now that I have them for longer, it opens up avenues to do different things and to take time. And one of the things that I like to do is watch commercials with my students and parents and dissect them from a Christian perspective. And that's what this is really going to be about. So let's start talking first about rural contexts. As Pastor Cook pointed out, rural contexts are unique. There's a unique environment of rural contexts. For those of you who grew up in rural contexts, you know this, that where you grew up is different from an urban area when you visited a city or had family in the city. The community is different. People know each other, people know each other's business and all that sort of stuff. And of course, there's unique vocations within a rural context. In my context in Bloomfield, it's largely a farming community, and many of the industries that are in the area are built around the farming vocation. At the same time, I think it would be false to say that rural contexts are completely unique from other non-rural contexts. And what I'm going to focus on is the similarity between all contexts that we live in, simply because of the access to mass and social media. We live in an age where information is available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And we consume a lot of the same mass media as people in other parts of the United States and other parts of the world. There's a theorist by the name of Marshall McLuhan who talks about the rise of the internet and the rise of mass media and people able to connect to mass media creates sort of a global village. So that, 60, 70 years ago, the experience between urban and rural may have been much more noticeable. But as rural and urban both get access to mass media and to social media through internet, they're consuming, at least in terms of mass media, a lot of the same things. You watch a television show on Netflix, and so does a person halfway across the world watch a television show on Netflix. You consume a commercial, they consume a commercial. They're on Facebook, and even though you don't live anywhere near each other, you're on Facebook too, and you can experience a lot of the same things. So this focus on mass media is really what I'm going to talk about. That even though rural contexts are unique in a way, they're less unique probably than they ever have been because of our access to mass media and internet. So this practice of watching television commercials is what this breakout session is really about. It's a very practical breakout section. I'm going to take you through how I go about using commercials and watching commercials, co-viewing with my confirmands and parents, and how that leads to faith discussion. So it's going to be very practical, but why I do this is because I have this understanding of catechesis, which may be shared by you, maybe not. It's easy to think of catechesis, especially in a confirmation context, in a 2-year process, as simply memorizing the right answers, or knowing in your head the right answers to the questions of the catechism and the categories of the faith and things like that. I think that knowledge is important, and that gets into like memory work and things like that. At the same time, I think ultimately the goal of catechesis is you want the categories of the faith to be functional in the life of the Christian. You want the categories of the faith to actually be the lenses through which they make sense of the world around them. There's a man by the name of Kenneth Burke who talks about how the language that we use and that stands for the beliefs that we have can serve as screens that we look through, or lenses of glasses that we look through to make sense of the world. And so the goal of my goal in catechesis is to really help people make sense of the world like a Christian. And one way to do that is to look at the world around us and talk about how it makes sense from a Christian perspective. This can be done with any sort of phenomenon around us. You can do it with personal relationships. You can do it with what's going on. But one sort of cultural artifact that I've found to be useful is television commercials. Television commercials, we consume a lot of television commercials. A statistic from 2019 says that 17 minutes of every hour of television is commercial. We consume on average 157 hours of commercial a year, which is pretty wild. Obviously these numbers are down a bit as Netflix grows, which is doesn't have commercials, which is one of the beautiful things about Netflix. But commercials are a thing that we consume a lot. We're familiar with a commercial, and they're easy to consume. They're easy to take in. You don't have to know how to read, for instance, to consume a television commercial. In fact, you don't have to read to consume most any television. It can make sense very, very easily as compared to a text. And commercials urge value and they urge choice, as we'll talk about here. And so commercials provide a great sort of cultural artifact to watch with students to put into practice the categories of the faith. Sin, redemption, the commandments, all that stuff. Commercial can be used as a jumping off point to have those kind of faith discussions, faith discourse. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about. Now, this is something that pastors can do with confirmation. If you're a lay person, though, sometimes you may be asked to help teach in some regard, and this could be something that you use. I use it in my classes all the time. But even just for parents or for grandparents, this is something that you can keep in mind when you're co-viewing media with your family members, your grandchildren. And so I'm going to take you through kind of how to watch a commercial, break it apart, analyze it, and then talk about how that moves into faith sort of discussion. So, any questions so far? Okay. So, first we'll do a basic commercial critique, then we'll move from the commercial critique to a faith dialogue about the commercial, and then we'll maybe have time for one more example, and then there'll be questions at the end. So the first thing I do when we go to confirmation, when we have confirmation class, we actually have it on Wednesday nights. One of the few nights the only night that the school in our rural context still holds as a sacred space of time, that they don't have stuff going on. And we have Vespers, and then we go into the fellowship hall, and the first thing we do is we watch a commercial. And what has allowed me to have the freedom to do this is that I know that I have these students and parents for quite a long period of time, from 7th grade all the way to 12th grade. As long as they're in high school, they're in confirmation class, and they're confirmed at 12th grade, and so I've got a lot of time to do things that if I was scrunched for time, I wouldn't do. But because I do, I can do this commercial. So we watch a commercial, and we talk about the context in which the commercial has been seen. So sometimes I have students who bring commercials. I assign them, like, find a commercial that you watched on television and bring it to class. Or tell us where it is on YouTube so we can find it. Then we watch the commercial together. Then we talk about, okay, does this commercial present a product, a specific product or a brand? What is the target market for the commercial? So obviously anybody can watch a commercial, but when people create commercials, the people who create commercials do so with a specific audience in mind. Sometimes you can tell that from the programming. You'll notice that programming for children often has commercials targeted towards children. Programming that elderly people watch has commercials surrounding it that are products that elderly people might consume. Okay? So try to get an idea of the demographics of the target market, and then look at the strategy. So every strategy of every commercial is to get you to buy whatever they're selling. Okay? So that's the goal of every commercial. The strategy is how they're trying to get that accomplished. How are they going to put you in some sort of mental state so that you'd be more inclined to buy the product? They can use information. Sometimes give you information about the product. Sometimes they compare their product to some other product. Maybe it's a comparison of price. Maybe it's a comparison of efficiency or some other aspect of workability. They can use a celebrity ethos, right? So a lot of commercials have celebrities in them. They can bring in an expert, a scientist with a lab coat to talk about this. They can use a testimonial. Oftentimes they just present people in the commercial that are people that you are invited to identify with. That somehow you want to be like the person in the commercial, and this consumption of this product will help you be more like them. And then there's pathos. So pathos is emotion, emotional appeals. Lots of commercials are simply intended to create emotional response within the audience. Lots of times humor, sometimes fear. Sometimes they use sex appeal. And they do this through the narrative of the commercial, which even in 30 seconds, it's amazing what a story you can tell in 30 seconds or a minute. They use images and they use music. So what we're going to do now is just do a basic critique of a commercial. We're going to watch a commercial and then talk about it according to these categories. And then we'll move on to faith talk. So this is a Ford F-150 Raptor commercial. And can everybody see that okay? All right. I don't know if there is a light we could turn off. Maybe just the front one, I don't know. It's a lot of light switches over there. Okay. So this is a Ford F-150 commercial. We're just going to watch it, and we're just going to dissect it according to the categories that I laid out. Oh, well, before we started, I have to get my mic close to the speaker. Would you help me? Something outside. Just put it up. yes, I do have a handout where you can follow along. And I believe, I don't know if that's available on Google Drive quite yet for those watching, but it is in your folder if you're present. Now, make sure to get it up to Google Drive. So, this is a truck commercial. You know, I have kind of an affinity for truck commercials in general, and part of the reason I chose a truck commercial is we're in a rural ministry context, right? And if you've grown up in rural places, you know that trucks are important. Lots of people have trucks; they're very useful. There is a mythology around trucks, which is interesting, but I probably won't talk about that. But let's just go through the way that you would just break down this commercial from a communication standpoint, and then in the next commercial we'll actually get into how you go from that into talking about faith, because the transition is not difficult. So first, I don't know the context of this commercial. I didn't watch it on live TV. I got it off of YouTube, and I never saw it live, so I can't tell which programming it was situated by. Could have been Monday Night Football. Maybe that could have told me something about who's watching the programming and things like that. It is a product commercial, so the brand is Ford, but there's a particular product that they're having, a particular model of Ford, right? So sometimes a commercial will just be about the brand, just about Ford in general, but sometimes they have a particular product in mind, in this case, a Ford F-150. Target demographics. Is this geared more at men or women? Well, you don't actually get to see a person in the commercial, do you? You don't, right? Now, based upon the programming, if I knew that, you could maybe tell if this was, during some programming that more men or more women watch. So, for instance, if it's Monday Night Football, it might have been geared more towards men because more men watch Monday Night Football. When it comes to the Super Bowl, all bets are off because everybody watches that. But you can get a little bit maybe from the product itself. Who buys more trucks? Now, obviously, men and women both drive trucks. But if you look at the data on who buys trucks demographically, it does lean more towards men than women. Age. Anybody, even a small child could make sense of this commercial and be like, oh, cool. But in terms of target, I think they're probably targeting someone who is able to not only want after the product, but actually be able to buy it. A Ford Raptor is pretty expensive new. And so here the age would be probably, 30s, 40s, 50s onward. I don't know when people stop getting excited over new trucks. Probably never. Socioeconomic status. So again, the product tells us a little bit about this. This is upper middle class type of vehicle if you're going to buy it new. Okay, so one thing when it gets to age, you have to realize that even though the target market is for a particular age group, brand loyalty begins at a very young age. For instance, in my context, there are 3- and 4-year-old children who can tell the difference between a red and a green tractor. And their brand loyalty is strong, and it's generational. So we start to develop brand loyalty towards products at a very young age. And so even though the target, no 3-year-old's going to buy a Raptor, this commercial can be influential to them, and they're like, oh, this is cool, and so that can happen at a younger age. What's the strategy? So strategy first, logos, or giving of argument or information. This gives some information, doesn't it? So you notice how they slow down at various parts. It's very fast moving until they slow down, and then through that computer generated thing they tell you information about the traction control and various other things. So there is some information. There's no comparison, but the information is there. Is there any ethos? Not really. There's no celebrity. You only get to see a person driving it, right? You imagine it's a professional driver though, but there's really no ethos. What about pathos? What emotion is this trying to create within you? Well, excitement, right? How does it do that? Well, by the fast-moving imagery and cut shots of the truck and showing what the truck does, and by the music, which is a song by Metallica, Enter Sandman, in case you're wondering. And so the music here and the imagery combined together is meant to give you an emotional feeling of excitement about the product, as well as bits of information at little points where they slow down. We have just completed a basic critique of this commercial. Okay? Does that all make sense? So that's one half of doing a commercial critique in a catechetical context, is just thinking about the commercial. Just getting people aware of the strategies involved with how commercials sort of work. And it's kind of fun. I mean, I'm a nerd, I'm an outlier, so this type of stuff is fun for me. But I've noticed that whether you're dealing with adults or children in a confirmation context, or whether I'm teaching a college class using this, it's enjoyable for them to practice the insights of analyzing a commercial. And it changes the way that you view commercials for the rest of your life if you do it enough. No commercial is ever just a commercial anymore. It's this opportunity to sort of go, okay, what's going on here behind the scenes?
And the other side of that, of course, you'll ruin your kids for life, to what you expose them to. And the reason I say that, I've got a kid who got nothing but Fords, and I've got a kid who got nothing but Chevys. And of course, it's my fault, because of the first vehicles that they got, I gave them, you know. I bought the oldest one Chevy, the other one Ford. To this day, they just fight tooth and nails about arguing
about Ford or Chevy.
You know.
Yeah, that's a live conversation that's happening all over rural America. yeah, and so this brand loyalty is a reality, and sometimes it's based upon the first car that we have.
Yeah, in this case, that's what it was.
Yeah. So you will definitely, if you get people critiquing commercials, you will ruin commercials in a sense, in that you can never see them the same way ever again. And so even if nothing else gets done, you're creating really savvy, critical consumers. and so, sorry, oh wait. Okay.
Another one?
I've got another one. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch this commercial, and then we're going to critique it, and then we're going to move sort of into faith talk about it. This is a commercial that I just did this last Wednesday with my confirmation group, and I'll just take you through some of the ways that I moved from commercial to talking about categories of the faith that are drawn from the Small Catechism and various things. So. It's another Ford.
Forward march to the next generation and a brand new age, to the future and the future of time. Introducing the all-new Ford F-150, the first and only pickup with a high-strength military-grade aluminum alloy body, up to 700 pounds lighter, to haul more than any half-ton pickup on the planet. Over 100 patents, so you can work any smarter, and every single square millimeter tougher. Pulling the most of any half-ton pickup, with the muscle to move the world, and brains to change it. This is the all-new Ford F-150, the future of tough.
All right. So let's critique it, and then I will move it in from critique to faith talk, and then I'll explain sort of how to think about the commandments in terms of watching a commercial. I love this because you don't usually, when you watch a commercial, the last thing probably on your mind is the 10 Commandments. But if there are functional categories in your life, you will start to make sense of even commercials and anything else in terms of 10 Commandments and the Apostles' Creed. So, this commercial, what is the context? I don't know. I got it from YouTube. This is why I like sometimes having the students bring their own commercials that they watched live so they can tell me what they were watching when they saw it. And it gives them some buy-in to the activity. They get to choose a commercial that they like. So I don't know the context. This is a product commercial, Ford F-150. So specific product, not just a brand commercial. Again, target market, similar to what we talked about before, right? Truck sales trend towards male. The age can be any age. Race is not a component here. And although I didn't count how many, the diversity of actors involved. Socioeconomic status, I think working class is really what the commercial is about. So I imagine that this is a working class sort of demographic. So, what's the strategy? Does the commercial present information? Yeah, it does, right? It presents information about the Ford F-150, what it can do, military grade, aluminum, all that sort of stuff. So it does present some information. Is there any ethos involved? There's no celebrity, there's no expert opinion. There are little snapshots of working men, right?
That was Dennis Leary's voice.
Was that Dennis Leary?
I'm pretty sure.
Could have been Dennis Leary's voice. I didn't know that. So, if that's Dennis Leary, then there is a little bit of celebrity involved, right? If you know who Dennis Leary is. Yeah, so here, again, there's a lot of pathos involved. What's the story? So what is the commercial, what emotion do you think it's trying to create in the viewer?
Pride?
Yeah, pride in what?
Confidence, too.
Confidence? Confidence and pride in what?
Pride in your work?
In hard work, right?
Yourself, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the main focus of the commercial. It's pretty easy to identify. They show a lot of working men doing hard work, which is work to be proud of, work to be confident in, work to have the right tools for. There's a DeWalt saw in there, which seemed really weird. I don't know if Ford and DeWalt have some sort of thing, but that was a clear product placement. So yeah, the notice that the music is sort of that marching kind of music. So that, along with the military grade, there might be some idea of duty involved here as well. Duty in work, which duty is a important concept for Christians. So this by identifying the strategies and the emotions and what they're portraying can get us into the realm of talking about faith. How do Christians talk about work? Is work a good thing? Dang right it is, right? God didn't create us to sit on our duffs and do nothing, no. He created us so that we might work. This was Adam and Eve in the garden, right? He created them in the garden to take care of the garden, to have dominion over the earth, right? And subdue it. And so that's part of our creaturely existence, is working, is subduing the earth, using it for our benefit and the benefit of others. So work is a positive thing. And this commercial is appealing to that positive aspect of work that most people recognize, whether you're Christian or not. Now, the Christian word for work is, or the umbrella term that our work kind of comes under is vocation, right? A calling. People have different callings. But in each calling, they are called to serve their neighbor. And our jobs are part of how we serve our neighbor. We have specific skills, specific characteristics that God has given to us so that we might utilize those in a particular area of life. Not all the same area. I'm not a surgeon. I'm glad there are surgeons. I would make a terrible farmer. I'm glad there are farmers. I'm not very good at building anything. But there are people that are, and so all of our vocations, our callings, are good things, and that's what this commercial is appealing to. Now, when can work be a bad thing? Sunday morning, right? So, like any good thing in our life, we can turn it into an idol, right? We can turn it into something that we serve above all else. We can see our primary identity connected to what we do in terms of work at the expense of our baptismal identity as God's children, right? And so, in my class, I ask these questions about this commercial. I talk about work as a good thing, which gets us into the realm of vocation. Gets us talking about our creatureliness and how God created us to live. It also gets me talking about idolatry, first commandment. You know, so if you see yourself in terms of your work, and you in rural areas, work ethic is a huge thing. Being busy is a huge thing. Oftentimes, being busy is the God term for people in a rural context. Which, of course, this is why the most productive people are in the zone 3, as Pastor Cook was talking about. But, like any good thing, it becomes an idol when we see it as primary, when we serve it at the expense of our primary, in terms of the true God. And this allows this, so this commercial allows you, if you're willing to engage with it and talk about the values that are presented in the commercial, allow you to jump off to talk about all sorts of stuff. So for instance, in this commercial, as I said before, we talk about creation and our creaturely existence and vocation. We can talk about idolatry and the first commandment. We can talk about fifth commandment, where we're called not only not to murder people, but to help and support everybody in their physical need, right? Part of our jobs and our vocation is doing that. Building houses for people, growing food for people. Those are all ways that we serve our neighbor. So there's just an example of how you can sort of make this jump. In any commercial, because every commercial urges values and urges choice, any commercial, if made sense of through Christian lenses, can serve as a way to talk about the categories of the faith. Now, the 9th and 10th commandment, of course, have to do with coveting. So, coveting is oftentimes wanting, we think of it as wanting something that is somebody else's. I think that you could expand the 9th and 10th commandment and the understanding of coveting is wanting something that's not yours, including being dissatisfied with what you have. Now, all commercials want you to desire after their product. In fact, if you have kids and you've ever taken them into Walmart and down the toy aisle, the I wants sort of just come on, they come on strong, right? Lots of times the I wants are the I wants that are influenced by watching television commercials. Commercials geared toward children are a constant part of children's programming. And the more commercials they see, the more they're aware of what's out there for them, the possibilities of what they can have. And so when they go to the toilet, it's like, oh yeah, I see that. I recognize that. I want that sort of thing. So when you start to deconstruct commercials, at the very least, every single time you can talk about the 9th and 10th commandment. Is buying this product really going to satisfy? Do you need a new truck? Or do you just want a new truck?
Used would be fine.
Yeah, a used one, So we're constantly by commercials, we're constantly being invited to want after things that we don't have. And simply by addressing commercials via the 9th and 10th commandment, you're always talking about being satisfied with what you have, consuming not always for want, but for need, and distinguishing between needs and wants, which is an important distinction, biblical distinction. Jesus talks about God providing what we need. He does not promise that God will give us everything we want. God promises that we will have what we need. And so every commercial can be brought under the 9th and 10th commandment. 4th commandment. So fourth commandment has to do with our relationship to those in authority over us. I bring this up because sometimes, especially in kids commercials, so let me back up for a second. So in your handouts, you can see the 9th and 10th commandment. I'm going to go through that so I make sure that I ask all the questions. When you watch a commercial, you can always ask 9th and 10th commandment questions of that commercial. Because every commercial is an attempt to get you desire after that which you do not have. Therefore, there's always an opportunity to talk about the 9th and 10th commandment. Will this product really bring satisfaction? Is this product trying to create a desire or play on a desire that is unfitting for a Christian? Is this a need product or a want product? What's the difference? How should Christians think about their needs versus their wants? Is buying something new just because it's new a Christian way to act? Okay. I talked about the first commandment a little bit. Is the commercial playing on fear or love or trust? Is it asking me to fear, love, or trust in anything other than God? Is it trying to get me to see my primary identity as something other than a child of God? So, you could argue that this commercial is playing on a good thing of work, but work can easily become an idol for a lot of people. And so that's always a first commandment aspect. Fourth commandment, how does this commercial portray those in authority? Parents, teachers, elders, etc. This is great for kids commercials. Because oftentimes in kids commercials, this was especially true in the 90s and early 2000s, if you grew up in that era. There were lots of kids commercials during that time. And parents are portrayed as being out of touch, as being in a different area of meaning than the children. And you see this in sitcoms too, most often. Parents with kids, parents are dumb, kids are smart, right? I mean, Homer Simpson would be the prime example, right? Not the sharpest tool in the shed. Whereas Lisa is like super smart, right? Dad dumb, kid smart. And you see this in commercials where they show children in relationship to their parents. How do they portray the parents? Or teachers, for instance. Teachers can be shown as being out of touch, as not being in on the culture of the children and things like that. And so commercials appeal to this, and this was a big appeal in the early 2000s and in the 90s. You can watch loads and loads of commercials, everything from cereal to fast food, that show the children as being sort of cool and in the know, and the parents being uncool and not in the know. This divide between parents and children, this generational divide sort of thing, which is not in line with how we should view our parents or teachers or anybody in authority, right? We shouldn't see them as ultimately divided from us, out of touch with us, and things like that. They utilize that appeal so that kids are more likely to consume the product. All right, sixth commandment. Does this commercial use sex as a selling strategy? There are commercials that do. Does the commercial sexually objectify the characters? Oftentimes they do. Celebrities present themselves as sexual objects. So this, and it depends what sort of commercial that you're dealing with. Now, there'll be times where I prep a commercial beforehand, and there'll be times where they bring a commercial and you're kind of working on the fly. When you're starting doing this, it's better to prep a commercial beforehand. And lots of times I'll prep a commercial because I recognize in the commercial that it'll lead to a particular area of faith talk that I want to talk about in that class. But there's lots of commercials that do use sexual objectification. How does this commercial's presentation of sex differ from a Christian view of sex? Fifth and seventh commandment. Who are the people that actually produce the product? Where are the resources used to make the product come from? Can we be sure that the transaction in acquiring the product actually benefits the people and the environment in which they live? What view of work is the commercial drawing upon to make their product more desirable? So these are all fifth and seventh commandments, because the fifth and seventh commandment have to do with helping our neighbor in our body and doing right by our neighbor in terms of economic transactions and securing their personal property, right? So this leads into a question oftentimes about, which is a separate sort of thing, but President Seiler, do you know where your shirt was made?
I think I saw it was made in Honduras. I did.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where mine is made, but Honduras, Hencho, Mexico, Cambodia. This brings up an important aspect of a Christian conversation that we don't talk about, which is that we're oftentimes very much separated from the actual production of the things that we consume. We don't know where they're made. We don't know who they're made by. If they're made in another country, we don't know the benefit or the disadvantages of that being made in that part of the country, of that part of the world. We don't think about it. We're separated about it. And because we don't think about it, we don't think we're culpable. If you read the large catechism, though, small catechism, but especially the large catechism, Luther's writing in a context where you knew where everything came from. This is the Middle Ages, right? There's no transportation there's no textiles being made someplace far away abroad unless it's from as trade routes open up and things like that. But this is a very modern thing that we as Christians do all the time, is we buy and we have no idea of who bought it. Could have been made by a 6-year-old. It could have been made by a 6-year-old in conditions where if that 6-year-old get hurt, or they're providing food for their family, and if they get hurt, they're out of job and there's no compensation. We don't know any of that. And commercials aren't going to tell you that. But it brings up a question of how we relate to the things we consume. Is it okay for us as Christians to sort of not think about our neighbors because we don't see them and we just sort of buy without thinking about it? So that's one area that commercials talk about. 8th commandment. Is the commercial presenting a truthful view of reality? Is the commercial sophistic in its appeals, making the better seem the worse or the worse seem the better? So we think about the 8th commandment as talking about other people. I expand this out a little bit to just be to giving a truthful representation of reality. Oftentimes commercials do not give a truthful representation of reality in terms of the consequences of the product if you buy it. Sometimes they present little snippets of very idealized reality so that you'll buy into it and you'll consume the product in hoping to partake in that idealized reality of some sort. The last part, so I have not worked through all the catechism in this part, but the first article, the Apostles' Creed, there's a lot of stuff to talk about when you're viewing commercials. How is the product produced? What are the effects of production on God's creation? How is the product consumed, and what are the effects on God's creation, including our own bodies? So what comes to mind oftentimes is energy drink commercials or fast food commercials. What we consume matters. It matters in terms of our health, and we consume you can consume in ways that disregard your health and disregard your body as a temple of God. And so oftentimes commercials and the products that they're putting forth can be, you can get into that talk about, okay, how should we view our bodies? How should we view what we put into our bodies? This can get you to talking about things as, drugs and alcohol or smoking or fast food and all that sort of stuff. Do we take care of our bodies? Are we stewards of our bodies, or sort of we do whatever we want with it? Are we stewards of creation, or do we just do whatever we want with creation, as though it's ours? That can all come from watching different commercials. And again, this isn't a template where you can just fit every commercial into this. It depends upon the commercial that you watch. The more you do this, the easier it gets, though. The more you analyze a commercial, with the categories of the faith, the easier it gets to talk about the commercial with using the faith categories. And the goal here is that not only will your students and your confirmands be able to watch commercials and make that understand them through the lens of faith, but they'll be able to just experience reality and experience it and make sense of it utilizing the categories of the faith. So let's watch one more commercial. Now this commercial could be so I came across this commercial. It might be the worst commercial I've ever seen.
We'll tell you if you're wrong.
Okay. So, watch the commercial. I'll talk about
it. If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's the new definition of greatness. By giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know the theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, soul generated by love.
Why is this commercial? Well, so sometimes I'll show my hand beforehand, like I did, and say this is one of the worst commercials I've ever seen. Sometimes I won't. I use this commercial in communication classes that I teach, and sometimes I won't tell them what I think, because lots of times that predisposes them or primes them to agree with me, because you don't disagree with the professor, right? But what do you guys think of this commercial? So recognize that a lot of people, there's people that will watch this commercial and just be thoroughly moved by it. There's some people that watch this commercial and were thoroughly moved, not in a positive direction. So for instance, the African American community was really not cool with this. And they showed this commercial once, and the Ram company caught a bunch of flack for it. Why?
They're using something culturally significant as just a way to make money, to market their product.
You mean Dr. Martin Luther King was not talking about Ram trucks when he gave that speech? I mean, for Christians, imagine this. Imagine them showing cut shots of the Passion of the Christ, crucifixion scene, and talking about service, and using Jesus' Sermon on the Mount or something like that. Yeah, so here is a clear example where the Ram company takes a significant cultural artifact out of context and uses it to predispose people to feel something towards their brand. There's parts in here, like this part right here. Where's that? Oops.
You don't have
How about that? What is going on here? So this is purely emotion. I mean, so there's argumentation going on by Dr. King's speech, right? The argument is you don't have to be intelligent to serve. Greatness is found in service, right? And then they use these cut shots of images of service in connection with that, as well as cut shots of the Ram truck. And all that together is supposed to create this feeling of what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of it.
Yeah, they use the ramp kind of almost subliminal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, because it's not
Right.
blatantly about Don Ramp, Joe Grant, you know, it's, yeah.
Yeah, so when I show this commercial, I mean, here I'm talking about them being aware of companies appropriating cultural significant things and values and appropriating them and reusing them. And why are they using them? To sell trucks. Now, Ram could have made a commercial, I don't know if you'd call it a commercial, where they just, on the day where Martin Luther King spoke this, they could have just shown the pictures of the service that they're showing without any of the Ram truck in it, with no Ram whatsoever, along with Dr. King's speech. And it would just have been a celebration, right? It would just been a moving sort of bit of video with words. But that's not their goal. That makes no fiscal sense to just do that, to just make this good thing, you know, in remembrance of Martin Luther King and all that he stood for. No, they've got to put their model in there. They got to put their brand in there because it's ultimately a commercial to sell things.
The strange thing about it, how could Ryan miss it that much? They grow up on an island somewhere.
Right.
I mean, you know, you'd think that they're a commercial company does fairly well, but you think that it would perceive.
It's amazing though how many companies do things like that. It's not just Ram, and the trouble is that we have become, seemingly, generally speaking, okay with companies doing that. So, for instance, Budweiser on 9/11.
Yeah.
They have tribute commercials, right? There's one with the Clydesdales going across the bridge, and they end up on the other side of the island, looking to where the towers were, and then they sort of they bend a knee. The Clydesdales do. But then right after that, Budweiser logo. It's not just to memorialize the event. They're utilizing the memory of the event to connect it to their product. And a lot of, people watch that commercial, and I watch the Super Bowl every year with a guy who's owns a Budweiser distributor, and every time the Budweiser, they're just like, yeah. Granted, their connection to the Budweiser brand is stronger than mine, but they saw that commercial and were just like, So this commercial does get us towards faith talk as well, obviously. But most of the time it gets us to a conversation with my students, my confirmation students and parents of how to be careful of how commercials try to appropriate Christianity, and consumerism tries to appropriate Christianity and turn it into something that they can use to make money. Any questions? I'm about out of time. Got about 4 minutes. I hope this made sense. I hope that again, if you're a pastor or DC watching, I think this is an easy way to get your kids thinking and get them thinking like Christians about about the phenomenon that they encounter in the world. If you're a lay person, I think co-viewing with your children and talking about it is a great thing to do. Talking about whether it's a movie or a television show that you watch together. I like it when families consume media together, and that leads to conversations about the media and about the faith and things like that. The more you do this, the easier it gets. It can be a little bit right away when you start doing it. I've been doing this for 10 years. So I can take a commercial and without my notes usually get to some place like that. But when I first started, I prepped to use it, and it's a fun thing, it's an interesting thing, and I think it's ultimately a profitable thing in terms of the goal of creating functional Christians who actually make sense of the world like Christians. Most of the time, there can be this idea that, well, my faith talk makes sense on Sunday in the service or when I'm in confirmation, but Christianity isn't really a viable lens by which to make sense of all reality. I would strongly challenge that. I would say absolutely it is. If it's not, then what the heck are we doing here? You know, it absolutely is the true way to make sense of reality, all of reality. And this is one way to practice that. So I pray that this has been helpful to you. If you ever have any questions or suggestions, if I, am not thinking about something with regard to my critique, I'm always welcome for suggestions and things like that. So that'll end our session. Lord be with you all. Thanks for having me.
So Pastor, you talked about not memorizing answers in confirmation, but developing faith. So do you find that kind of breaking down the fraud of the commercial? Does that get into the school, into the locker room? I mean, when we defraud or when we call the bluff on Graham, I don't know.
Yeah, so I do. First of all, I do have memorization as a part of my curriculum. but yeah, I think so. Are you like? Does this sort of talk flow out from students to other students? Is that what you're asking?
So we're breaking down commercials and trying to tell them how our commands relate to what this commercial is doing.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make that into functioning Christians?
Well, I think the more that you do it, the more that you put this into practice and walk this sense making with the commandments with them, the more they are able to utilize those categories themselves. That's kind of the idea. And this is very, so far it's kind of been, you could say this is law-based, right? But, there are opportunities too to proclaim the gospel, because anytime we are challenged with the law in terms of question, our identity as whose we are, there's an opportunity to reaffirm whose we are when we're at those times. So I think it's the more you do it, to answer your question, the more you do it, the more those categories make sense to the kids, and the more they're going to utilize those categories outside of that context.
You ever try with a sitcom or a movie?
I have not. We do watch an occasional movie, and we do talk about it, but you could watch a sitcom and co-view.
Michael Scott has done a couple on different movies.
Yeah.
How that's
Yeah, co-viewing and discussion is great. And it builds that community of shared experience amongst your confirmation kids, which is great. You're all doing this together and you're talking about it together. And that stuff sticks, I think. So
you with your requirement of memorization and stuff of the commandments and everything, then using this, it's like math, learning the formulas and stuff, but then this is practical application.
absolutely.
Because my daughter's a math teacher, and she's, students, why do I need to learn this? Well, this is a practical application because this is life, and that's where that is used in life.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's not theory. It's practical application, and
But you need the memorization and the base to know.
yeah, it's nice to be able to say this speaks to the fifth commandment, and not have people going, now what's the fifth commandment again? At the very basic level for them to understand. Okay, fifth commandment's don't murder and help a neighbor in their body. It makes this sort of thing, and it's an easy, readily available artifact. I mean, YouTube is just like you can find a commercial, So there's not a ton of investment in it, but I think the payoff is worth it. So, all right, Lord be with you all.
Thank you.